Welcome to our three-part series on the neuron. In this, the first video, we'll give a brief introduction to the nervous system and then talk about the structure of the neuron. In our second video, we'll talk about the change in charge that occurs and runs down the length of a neuron when it fires, something that we call an action potential. And in our third video, we'll talk about the synapse, the actual point of connection between two neurons. Okay, so a neuron is just a special type of cell we have in our brains and in our bodies. I sometimes have students ask, why are we learning about cells in a psychology course? You know, I learn about cells in my biology and my chemistry courses. I'm taking psychology so that I can learn about decision making and memory and social psychology. And while those are all relevant topics that you no doubt will cover in your intro psych course and other higher level courses if you choose, I look at it this way. Any of those behaviors, any thought you're having, any thought you have had, any thought you will have, your ability to be consciously aware of what's going on right now, the fact that you can take in sensory information like sights and sounds, interpret that information to make judgments and to guide behaviors. Anytime you move, you wave your hand to somebody you know, any of these functions, processes, and really the richness of human experience can all come back to a set of neurons communicating with another set of neurons. So when we want to go and ask these more complicated general questions in psychology, understanding how neurons operate and communicate with each other actually becomes a pretty critical part of those questions. Neurons are distributed throughout our body in what we call the nervous system. Now, the nervous system, just as it sounds, is a system of nerves. And okay, so what's a nerve? Well, a nerve is just a tight bundle of neurons, all moving together towards the same place. So we say that neurons are distributed throughout the brain and body in this nervous system. Now, the nervous system can be divided into two general components. We have the central nervous system, which includes all the neurons in the brain and in our spinal cord, and we have the peripheral nervous system, which are all the neurons that kind of move out of the brain, move out of the spinal cord to other parts of our body that allow us to move our limbs and take in sensory information, the control of certain organs like our heart and our lungs, and the control of certain glands and the release of different hormones and different chemicals. So, in our nervous system, we have the central nervous system, all the neurons in the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, all the other neurons that move elsewhere. Okay, now let's move on to the structure of a neuron. So as I mentioned before, the critical part here is communication between neurons. So in order for communication to occur, the neuron needs a way to receive incoming information and to send on information to other neurons in the network. So here we have the structure of a neuron. Now the dendrites receive incoming information from other neurons. So information for other neurons get caught up in these branch-like projections called the dendrites. They're essentially the ears of the cell. So the neuron hears information from other neurons using its dendrites. We also have what's called the cell body, or sometimes called the soma, and this is just the nucleus of the cell. It's where all the genetic material is stored. And then we have something called the axon. So the axon is the long projection here through which information will travel down from this area of the neuron down towards the end and what are called axon terminals. Now, in each of these axon terminals, we have little storage containers called vesicles. And stored in these vesicles are the special type of chemical called neurotransmitters. Now, we'll talk more in our upcoming video about the type of information that gets sent down the axon here. But all we need to know for now is that information comes in through the dendrites. Information is then sent down the length of the axon, and once that information reaches the axon terminals, these vesicles open up and neurotransmitters are released and will eventually pass on that message to the dendrites of another neuron. There's one more part of the neuron I'd like to talk about, and that's what's called the myelin sheath. So here we have another neuron, but as you can see now, the axon is coated or insulated by this material, this substance we call myelin. So myelin is a fatty substance that lines the outside of the axon and helps that information travel down its length. So this is kind of the same idea if you want to think about it as an electrical cable. Okay, so there's going to be any number of wires that run through the cable, but there's some sort of protective coating that lines the outside of the cable so that the electricity doesn't escape out. Same idea here with myelin. The myelin insulates the axon so that that information that travels down its length towards the axon terminals can travel effectively and doesn't get released or dissipate as it travels. Okay, and that's the structure of the neuron. If you learned something from this video and you'd like to see more like it, please like and subscribe to the channel. As always, if there's a concept for a future video you'd like us to cover, please post in the comments. We'd love to hear your feedback.